Thank you for coming in for our second panel discussion. In the morning, we kind of talked about how the entire role of HR is changing, how we are, the way we recruit, the way we engage the workforce is changing. Today, we're talking about skills, a big problem in the Indian workforce. Hi, Jen, do join us. We're talking about how skills and competencies, one, they're changing at breakneck speed, and two, your organization needs competencies and skills, and getting the right workforce to connect with them is the biggest challenge that many organizations are facing. The last 2 years we've had a slowdown, definitely a slowdown, a good time for us to introspect, think about how the skills gaps have been and how to address them. Today, we are facing a situation where hopefully India will be back on track, India will be growing at breakneck speed, and what really happens is at that time, many of the, if you've laid the ground rules, you tend to do it well. Otherwise, what happens is 2006 to 2008, we saw death of ethics. You were poaching mindlessly, you were offering salaries because you had a job to complete. We can reach that stage, but have we used these 2 years to actually be ready with our employees? Have we multi-skilled them so that as we get more and more diverse work, we are able to kind of meet our requirements, and have we engaged that larger talent pool out there so that maybe they haven't become part of my pipeline, but it is out there and I have actually identified them. This is probably a good place to allow our panelists to set the tone. Prashant, would you like to start?
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity, Jayashree. As I was reflecting on the skill gaps, I noticed we have gaps of many nature, including gender. So thank you for bringing diversity to the panel. We would have been otherwise short on many gaps as well. So I like to think of it on two levels. One is there are roles which perhaps an organization will require for the future, which we can predict, where there is some visibility of what that would look like. And at least in my industry, there are perhaps a large set of roles that we don't know what we will need for tomorrow. I can't speak for it, but at least my industry is certainly grappling with that problem. So in situations like this, when you have to provide skills, competency levels for roles that don't exist, how do you start? Where do you start? Should you even attempt to start? So we think of it at two levels. We think of it at roles where there is some predictability of them remaining true, remaining alive in the future. And there are roles which are yet being written, for which it is difficult for us to have those competencies and skills defined today. And therefore, what we'd like to believe is we look for people which are able to live in that environment of ambiguity. We're looking for people or those competencies where you can live and define them on the go, and also redefine them. So I'll give you a small example just to put that in context. A lot of the roles, when you start with defining them, you think of them in the way they are. So kind of being an agency, we look at roles like copywriters. But instead of a copywriter, we now think of the roles where your responsibility is, for example, to have Rahul fall in love with Reema. That's the role definition as a copywriter. And if you think of that as a role definition, everything else around starts revolving. So in the context of what lies ahead, we believe there are roles which are predictable to some degree, but a large set of the roles aren't predictable. So instead of trying to create everything, start with what you know and then build upon it along the way.
Okay. Shashi Kanth, you're talking about a constantly moving job role, so to speak. How does the candidate and the line managers fall in line with that new paradigm?
Yeah, I'll just introduce this topic in a slightly elaborate manner and try and see how much less time I can take. Bridging gaps, skill gaps, actually we need an ecosystem in this country to actually take this forward. So thankfully in the last 4 to 5 years, we have seen the government of India actually coming forward with a National Skills Development Corporation, which is essentially a body to actually enable the whole ecosystem to function. Now, and therefore my perspective will be a kind of a bridge between the candidate who is sitting outside and the organization who actually waiting to absorb a lot of skilled and pre-skilled people. See, today the jobs are, therefore one of the first steps that the ecosystem has put in place, or starting to put in place, is formation of sector skills councils, and therefore laying down occupation standards for a particular role. So therefore that part of the job is already started off in this country. UK took about 108 years, 110 years, Germany is about 400 years old, we are just about 5 to 8 years old in this whole place. So therefore there is a lot of work that needs to be done. Now coming to the specific point, training providers like us are on constant trying to look at what new skills that the organizations actually want in their people who are coming into this, into their system. And therefore there is always an industry collaboration that keeps happening at every stage of our journey in terms of trying to get people capable enough to enter the various organization systems. So while the target is moving as what Jayashi said, there are certain skills which are uniformly required across the roles. So that, to my mind, is what is called the base level of the datum that we need to create. And that skills can be actually provided outside the organization as a pre-skill.
Would you like to articulate that as well?
See, for example, if you look at say knowledge of little bit of arithmetic, whether he's a sales guy or a service guy, there's something of an arithmetic that he needs to know. Maybe 8th class arithmetic or 9th class arithmetic. He needs to know a little bit of English because he has to talk English, because today that still a little bit of English still helps him to actually grow socially up in terms of his esteem. Then he would want interaction, human interaction skills, be it sales or be it service or be it any function in terms of the shop floor or wherever he is there. He needs interaction skills. So that's the third one. He needs life skills. The guy, he has to grapple with his life when he comes into larger metros and where the jobs are created. He needs a lot of skills where he has to grapple with his life. And therefore, an element of finance understanding. What is the money? How much can he save? Where can he put his money? Is there a small little PF? Is there a small little PPF? Can he send his money, some of the money back home? Right? So adjusting to life, a little bit of finance, arithmetic, customer interaction, human interaction skills, life skills are very, very important for him. And these are commonly required across all the roles, whatever the organization is, and at whichever role they actually, whichever level they take in people. From there we can actually build domain specific skills to an extent outside, but large part of it is actually built within the organization where the person, he or she, would actually enter into. So the bridge between the organization and the candidate with what we provide as a service provider is actually in two stages, if you ask me, a two-tier structure. Some outside, large inside. Okay. So unless this collaboration works like a beautiful marriage, we will not be able to overcome this gap if that doesn't happen.
Jayant talked about the skills, the basic skills that every candidate needs, and then you have the competencies, the skills and the competencies. Would you like to articulate how that has become a challenge in a constantly moving environment?
Yeah, I'll take that as Jayashree, but before that, allow me to digress a bit.
Yeah.
You know, and look at what kind of course correction is happening in the skill sector.
Sure.
You know, at the macro level, you know, through a prism of timelessness, private sector keeps blaming the government that this doesn't happen. Government says that private sector doesn't do enough. You know, so how could there be a meeting of the minds? He did talk about you know, the sector skill councils and things like that. See, the entire initiative started, the entire seriousness about skilling happened in the country a few years back when the late C.K. Prahlad under India at 75 mission, you know, he evangelized as to what kind of country we'd like to see when independent India becomes 75-year-old. And he said, among other things, we'll need 500 million skilled people. Now, nobody knows where that 500 million figure came from, but the fact is, it was an aspirational figure looking at some macroeconomic trends and the fact that the economy was growing at 9% per annum at that point of time, you know. So, so that seriousness started, but before that, you know, we only looked at BTechs, MBAs, ITIs, and polytechnics. Nothing beyond these 4 buckets when it came to skilling, you know. So, see, today what is happening is, look at the capacity vis-a-vis this 500 million. You know, today in the country we have a capacity to skill about 50 lakh people per annum, 5 million per annum. And out of a total workforce of about 48 crore, including labor class, barely 5% of them have undergone any formal education, and another 5% would have, they have become skilled on the job. They didn't have any formal education. So if you take aside, keep aside these things, and look at the today's capacity, we are going to take almost 90 more years to create this kind of a work. So where would the demographic dividend come? There'll be acts of terrorism. There'll be those kind of forces which will be operating. Because you are making, there's a complete disconnect today. Between what government does and what the private sector does. So I think to address that, one very, very important thing which has happened at the Government of India level with a lot of collaboration with the private sector is that this National Skills Qualification Framework has come. So that the children or youth, they do not look at, that if they have to skill themselves, that's the end of the road. Today, skilling is not aspirational. Beyond a BTech and MBA or some of the professional courses, skilling is not aspirational in the country. I mean, we are to be blamed. We have not attached enough premium to skilling in this country. I'm focusing, because bulk of the numbers will come from people at the bottom of the pyramid, not this creamy layer of skills, because those numbers are few and far between, So I think it's very, very important to give them vertical mobility in the skilling space, as well as horizontal mobility, so that any point of time they want to move from skilling space to the mainstream education, they could do that. This National Skills Qualification has identified 10 levels, much like what other countries have done, and that has just become a law. And I think, the industry has to start embracing. See, the problem is in this country, industry pays lip service, and we have become, my day job is also for TCS, and we have become non-believers, that nothing that government is doing will work. But, how will it happen? So I think another thing, which, was talked about, that, the sector skill councils are essentially, but before that, let me also say that, industry used to say that whatever All India Council of Technical Education or NCVT, whatever courses they mandate has no relevance whatsoever with what in the industry needs, So there was no meeting of the minds. So therefore, these sector skill councils are in the process of being set up. Some of them have been set up, and idea is to come up with national occupational standards and qualification packs. And the courseware and the curriculum will be derived out of these packs for each key job role for each of the verticals. And these will now onwards be defined by private sector, by industry, which is largely private sector, and now that's how that course correction will happen.
When do you expect this to
See, it has, if you look at countries like Switzerland, Germany, UK, Canada, Australia, where, skilling happens in a very, very serious manner. Those countries have taken almost more than 2 decades or maybe perhaps 3 decades to mature this model. Our journey started barely 3, 4, at best 5 years ago.
Shouldn't we leapfrog?
So we must leapfrog, I think, and therefore this is such a huge space that the more you do, the more seems to remain to be done. This is the largest HR intervention ever seen on this earth in the history of mankind.
Right.
No country has ever done it, ever, kind of a thing.
Right.
Such is the enormity of the task, and therefore the more you do, the more seems to remain to be done.
Right. Rajiv, let's take the employees and the employers. Today you see which starts first. The employee is aspirational, the employee wants to grow, skill himself, make himself relevant constantly, himself, herself relevant, gender equality. But what about the employer? How much comes from the employer? How much comes from the employee? And are we do we need to fix at the educational level? Do we need to fix at the level of ongoing education as well?
See, Jayashree, here I would say the golden rule is that there are no golden rules.
Yeah.
And let's start with that basic premise, because this is like Virendra was talking about,
Yeah.
the continual change
Yeah.
and the future that has already arrived.
Yeah.
It's kind of a change and a continual change process that is affecting us. So that probably sets the context of the current working environment, wherein the skills and the competencies are getting not only defined, redefined, learnt, unlearned, relearnt, and so on and so forth. The background is last 10 to 12 years what's happened around the globe, not only in India. And so that is something, I'll just digress for a minute to kind of capture that context, which is actually build the current context and what's going to build the future from sublime to ridiculous. I mean, the range is very wide. It all started 1998 if we see. In fact, the business driver was globalization, and that brought in a lot of furore in the business arena. And the technology driver was the Y2K bug. Y2K bug was overcome, and by overcoming, we created an overkill of technology. And that's what we are facing. The repercussions of that we are facing today. The overkill of technology was in terms of internet being given as a tool to communicate globally. We also had the ERPs, which could help you manage your resources globally. The SAP, the kind of PeopleSoft and so on and so forth, JD Edwards, which are still state-of-the-art technologies. But they look static and sterile when compared to the dynamic nature of the BPPs, the business performance platforms which are emerging. Side by side, what happened, the Lehman Brothers occurred. Because of this, probably they didn't register the change. And the fact that the business driver had changed, and they continue to align themselves to the old ways of looking at things. As under competency mapping and skill mapping, you have those success profiles. Now, what worked in the past need not necessarily work, and they never changed. They thought the world is always going to be northwards. It didn't happen that way. There was total commercial insanity because of this lack of understanding, and there was a difference of opinion, or probably they didn't understand the difference what was prime and what was subprime, and therefore the recession occurred. Now, post-Lehman world is a very different world, and carved out of what has happened in just about last 10 to 12 years. I mean, internet is not more than 12 to 13, 14 years old in a commercially utilized sense globally. And we are living, therefore, in a change environment where the business context or the business driver is continual change itself, which means change is not taking place over a period of time anymore, but as you rightly said, at every given point of time. So there is a tangent at every given point of time. So the kind of complexity, the magnitude of change and the complexity of change is becoming absolutely humongous. Now this gives the context of what is there in future to come. So linear extrapolation, probably in this context, what we are doing in India currently, as rightly said, is something phenomenal, which we have to achieve by 2020 or 2025, when we actually start getting that, the dividend, the social dividend, or whatever you say, the population dividend in the context of a global scenario. We'll have to redefine the paradigm shifts that are going to take place. Linear extrapolation having died its death. Paradigm shifts is something which is going to be there. Things are going to be more turbulent.
Is it going to be there, or is it already there?
It's already there. The indications are there that market turbulence has come to stay. Yeah. Whether recession comes, goes, stays, is done away with, the point is that that has to be factored. There was a context where, as I said, we were discussing earlier, that equilibrium was the right state to be in. In today's world, dynamic equilibrium is the reality. So you have to keep kind of, not only moving set of goals, but moving targets every point of time. You will have to be conversant, you have to be comfortable with the kind of ambiguity, taking decision in a state of semi-dark, if not total absence of light. So continual change, adapting, upgrading, modifying, changing every moment. It's difficult, but the point is that there's no go. If we have to kind of, leave aside thriving, but even to survive, we have to understand this basic dynamic of continual change. In this context, the skill and competency upgradation also has to be therefore attributed to this understanding of change. Your enunciation, your conceptualization and execution of competency based and skills that would be required in terms of knowledge. Knowledge has to be expansive. It cannot be now restrictive. It has to be participative, inclusive. Knowledge management tools are available, as Virender so beautifully put it in his presentation. The skills have to be kind of constantly learned, unlearned, relearned. So it's not only upskilling but reskilling at every given point of time. The attitudes and the aptitude also has to be now differently interpreted in the change of the continual change. Design thinking, the right side usage of mind, the creative process, the parallel thinking processes will have to be now engendered truly into the skill and the competency mapping that any organization will require to achieve its goal. And above all this would therefore now be the overarching values as a fourth paradigm: knowledge, skill, attitude or aptitude, and then the overarching values which will actually root you or anchor you to your basics and help you survive this brave new world of the future. Right. So it is in this context that we need to kind of reanalyze our own.
This comes from the employee or the employer?
Both. Basically, as I said, the golden rule is that there are no golden rules. So you have to set, and in that context, you have to think out of box. I mean, people come and say that you think out of box is easy said than done. But the point is, who the hell asked you to get into the box first? That is most important.